So our prompt for today is, the threat of nuclear weapons helps to maintain world peace, and nuclear power provides clean and cheap energy. Thus, the benefits of nuclear technology greatly outweigh the disadvantages. To what extent do you agree? So in this type of essay, we're looking for two reasons to either agree or disagree with the prompt. Okay. It says to what extent, and a lot of people interpret that to mean, or to write in such a way that they say, oh, I partially agree and I partially disagree. On the one side, da-da-da-da, however, on the other side, ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. The problem with talking about both sides is that your position on the issue has to be clear throughout the essay. And when people try and write a balanced essay that discusses both sides, their position on the issue ends up being completely unclear. It ends up being more like descriptive writing rather than persuasive writing. So for this prompt, I strongly recommend choosing one side only, the one that's easier for you to talk about, and giving two reasons for that side. Either agree or disagree, but not both. So just before we get into, I brought in a short text here from Wikipedia that kind of summarizes part of this topic, but I'd just like to get your opinions first. So we've got, we have to look at this from two sides, right? Because it doesn't say just nuclear weapons or nuclear power. We have to talk about both nuclear weapons help to maintain world peace and nuclear power provides clean and cheap energy. So let's take them one at a time. Do you agree, Kelly, that the threat of nuclear weapons helps to maintain world peace?
No.
Okay, why not?
Well, I don't really know very well about nuclear weapons, but the word of threat, it doesn't make me feel comfortable. I don't believe that nuclear weapons should be in this world. It's always creating problems. It's always creating war. I don't think any positive things about it, nuclear weapons.
Okay, so just to develop your idea further, so you have to provide an explanation for your position. So why do you say that nuclear weapons contribute to war or contribute to violence?
Because that's what Russia, for example, and other countries use it, just to threat other countries. For example, not long ago, in North Korea, the dictator, he was using nuclear weapons to threat Japan. And what he did is basically release one of the nuclear weapons into Daisy.
Sorry, I missed the last thing that you said.
Yeah, what he did, basically, the North Korean dictator, he released one of the nuclear weapons into Japan Sea. Yeah.
I think he shot a rocket that had no warhead in it, just to show that he could hit them.
Yeah.
I don't think he actually detonated a nuclear weapon.
No, he didn't release it. He just threat. Yeah. He was saying, like, if you continue, we are the country with weapons and power. And we can do whatever we want. So we have nuclear weapons and we can release one of the missiles to your ocean, to your sea, and kill all the animals in the ocean. and contaminate them. So that's what exactly those nuclear weapons, I guess.
And okay, so that's actually a very good example. Do you remember why North Korea was in a conflict situation with Japan?
I don't remember very well, but I think it has something to do with the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
I think Japan and Korea they share part of the ocean, I think.
So let's just call it a territorial dispute.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone else have any examples of nuclear weapons being used to make the world a more dangerous place? Okay, what about the other side of the argument? Does anyone agree that the threat of nuclear weapons helps to maintain world peace? Remember, if this is the question you get,
Yes,
then yep.
over the last 50 years, it has avoided a large-scale conflicts between, leading world powers.
Mm-hmm. Can you develop this idea a little bit?
One benefit I also know is that it has reinforces national borders.
Are you thinking of a specific example?
No.
Okay. So anything that you say like that, this is one of the issues that we get into very often in IELTS, is that someone will make a statement like it reinforces national borders, but as the reader, I'm not sure what that refers to. So as the writer, it's kind of your responsibility to develop that idea a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we think about the countries that have nuclear weapons, they certainly use it to protect their own national borders from
Mm-hmm.
invasion, right? So
Mm-hmm.
which countries are we talking about? When we say nuclear armed countries, which countries have nuclear weapons?
US?
Yep. Hmm.
I only know US. Russia.
Iran.
Iran probably does not, as far as we know.
Mm.
They
What about
Korea,
Israel?
Israel does. Hmm.
North Korea,
China?
Korea,
Yeah.
China, India,
Nope. I don't think so, India. I don't know.
Pakistan.
Not sure.
Let's just ask Google. Does India have nuclear weapons? India has 100 to 140 to 150 nuclear weapons.
Mm.
Does Pakistan have nuclear weapons? Yes, roughly the same thing. About 150 nuclear weapons. So there's a list of states here that have nuclear weapons. We're missing a few big ones. England and
Mhm.
France do.
Mhm.
And I think we've got them all. There's another argument to be made too, that countries that have given up their nuclear arsenals or have been convinced to give up weapons of mass destruction, things have not ended well for their leaders. So in particular, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya and Saddam Hussein in Iraq, that it was those countries became targets for invasion after they gave up their weapons of mass destruction. So what is it about nuclear weapons that people argue makes their country safe?
Actually, I feel this is maybe one of the disadvantage of nuclear. The country like uh, possesses the nuclear the nuclear weapon. Usually, it's control the world.
Okay, so what I notice is that we're missing the vocabulary to really talk about this issue. So let's read a little bit. This is from Wikipedia. It's only a couple of paragraphs. It's only a few paragraphs. Let's read it together because there's a lot of good vocab in here to really discuss this issue. Kelly, let's start with you. Can you read this first paragraph? This is from an article entitled "Nuclear Peace."
Sure. Nuclear peace is a theory of international relations that argues that under some circumstances, nuclear weapons can induce stability and decrease the chances of crisis escalation. In particular, nuclear weapons are said to have induced stability during the Cold War, when both the US and the USSR possessed mutual second strike retaliation capability, eliminating the possibility of nuclear victory for either side. Components of nuclear peace.
Proponents.
Components.
Proponents.
Proponents. Proponents of nuclear peace argue that controlled nuclear proliferation might be beneficial for inducing stability. Critics of nuclear peace argue that nuclear proliferation not only increases the chance of interstate nuclear conflict, but increases the chances of nuclear material falling into the hands of violent, non-state groups who are free from the threat of nuclear retaliation.
Okay, so before we continue, is there any new vocabulary in that paragraph?
Yeah, retaliation.
Retaliation, does anyone know this word? It means revenge. Retaliate means someone does something to you, you hit back, you attack back.
Okay.
What's proliferation?
That's another word that I don't know.
Okay. Proliferation means becoming more common, but it has a negative connotation.
Okay.
Okay, so we use this for technology that becomes more common, but it's not in a positive sense. We can talk about nuclear proliferation. We can talk about even the proliferation of online advertising. It's just everywhere. It's annoying. It's ugly, and it just interferes with your web browsing. Okay, so in your own words, what is this paragraph about? Could you summarize it?
It's all about nuclear weapons. What is for some people, it could be like chances of crisis, degradation, stability. So basically it's talking about what is nuclear in the world. And it's talking about for some people are beneficial, for other people are not. So it's a different opinion here in this paragraph.
Okay. So the paragraph starts off by saying that nuclear weapons can induce stability and decrease the chances of crisis escalation. So how do they do that?
don't really know.
Okay, well, it's right here in the next sentence. It says, when countries go to war, they go to war with the expectation that they're going to win, right?
Mhm.
Like, countries don't start a war when they're sure that they're going to lose. So if I have nuclear weapons and you have nuclear weapons, then if I launch my nuclear weapons at you, what are you going to do?
Also exactly the same.
Right, and then who wins in that case?
Whoever have more nuclear weapons.
Right, well, nobody wins, right? I nuke
Yeah.
you, you nuke me, we're both destroyed. Maybe we both win, but at the same time, we both lose. Both of our
Mhm.
countries are gone.
Mhm.
So that's why it says eliminating the possibility of nuclear victory for either side. So that's why they talk about this. The policy or the philosophy used to be called, or it still is, MAD, mutually assured destruction.
Mhm.
Does that make sense for everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Abby, can you read this part?
Yeah. Argument. Nuclear peace result when the cost of war are unacceptably high for both sides. In two-sided conflict where both sides have mutual second strike capability, defense becomes impossible. So it is the very prospect of fighting the war, rather than the possibility of losing it, that induce restraint. Nuclear weapon may also lessen a state's reliance on allies for security, thus preventing allies from dragging each other into wars, a phenomenon known as chain ganging, frequently said to be a major cause of World War One.
Okay. So in your own words, what's that about? So these are arguments in favor of nuclear weapons being good for peace.
Restraint.
Mhm. Why does it make countries exercise restraint? This is just, it's basically the same thing that we read earlier.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So if you have nuclear weapons and I have nuclear weapons, what's going to restrain me from attacking?
Mm, mm, Nothing.
Mm, not quite. Remember, you have nukes, I have nukes, so why won't I attack you?
There is no reason. Like you can, right?
Except defense becomes impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what is going to restrain me from,
Because the other people also have nuclear weapon.
yeah.
Okay.
So if I attack you, I know that you're going to attack me and we're both going to
Uh-huh.
get destroyed.
Okay.
So even if I hate you, I'm going to leave you alone.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second argument, it's not frequently mentioned, but countries that have nuclear weapons feel very secure
Yes.
and they don't need to be sucked um, into battles with allies, for example. Right? They don't need to depend on other countries for their security. So let's say we have an alliance
Mm-hmm.
of mutual protection, and if you go into a battle or if you get drawn into a conflict, then because we have an alliance, I have to fight alongside you. Or if I start an argument with another country and we get drawn into a conflict, then I'm dragging you with me because we're allies.
Yes.
But if nuclear weapons allow states to be more independent so they don't need to depend on allies, then your troubles will be limited to you and my troubles will be limited to me, so we won't drag each other into a battle.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's look at the last one.
John, can I
Yeah.
ask a question? Does Canada has any nuclear weapon?
No.
Are we allies with United States?
Yes. We're also in NATO. So we have an alliance with, it's called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So we have an alliance with with both the United States and with a lot of European countries.
Okay.
So that if they're attacked, then we have promised to join them in either defending or attacking whoever attacked them. If you attack one member of NATO, you've essentially attacked all of them.
Okay.
So that's an example of chain ganging.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So in this alliance, the United States, England, and France all have nuclear weapons. Okay, and let's look at the criticism. Safa.
Yeah. Criticism of argument. Critics argue that war can occur even under condition of mutually assured destruction. Factors are not always rational. Related to and reinforcing that point is that there is always element of uncertainty.
An element of uncertainty.
Element of uncertainty. One cannot always control emotion, subordinate, and equipment, especially when has limited information and faced with high stakes and fast timetable. There are unintended consequences, unwanted isolation, irrationally misperception, and the security dilemma.
Okay, well, let's pause there for a sec. Maybe some vocabulary here that's difficult. Actors are not always rational. So these are criticisms of the argument that nuclear weapons contribute to peace. So the first argument is actors are not always rational. What does that mean?
Always right?
Well, rational means logical.
Logical? Yeah.
Like our friend in North Korea, right?
Sorry, it's your friend.
Not my friend. No, he's your friend. He's not my friend.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. Right. So he's a perfect example of this concept. Who knows what he's going to do? Right?
Correct.
There's always an element of uncertainty. This is a very nice phrase. You know, we think our plan is going to work, but there is an element of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
It says one cannot always control emotions, subordinates. What are subordinates?
Subordinates.
The people who work for you.
Like dependent people or?
Above you?
Workers. Subordinate is the opposite of boss.
Lower in.
Okay.
Lower level employees.
Yeah, lower, yeah.
Sub means under, right, like submarine, subway. So subordinates are people who work for you. And it says, yeah, you can't always control the people who work for you. Or at a national level, the government doesn't always have full control over some of its military personnel, right? Like you hear about corrupt generals, for example, selling weapons or escaping with weapons, stealing them. High stakes. There are unintended consequences. Does everyone know this this phrase? It's a good one. Means what's a consequence?
Like anything happen continuously or
Outcome of action.
Yes, an outcome. So unintended consequences are just outcomes that you didn't want. There's unwanted escalation. What does escalation mean? We saw that word up top, but we never talked about it.
Increasing.
Yes, increasing in seriousness, generally.
Yeah.
If you're on the phone with a call center representative and they're not giving you, or they're giving you a hard time, or they're just incompetent or whatever, you can say, I'd like to escalate this to your manager. I'd like to
Yeah.
escalate this issue to your manager. We've got irrationality, which is the opposite of rational. Right?
Yeah.
Misperception means you. What does misperception mean?
Misunderstanding. Like
Exactly.
yeah.
Okay. And then let's just continue with the last part. Go ahead. Safa.
some commenters critical of the concept of nuclear peace make the argument that non-state actors and rogue state could supply nuclear weapon to torture organization, and therapy undermine conventional deterrence and therefore nuclear peace, especially with the existence of international terror, terrorist, terrorist,
Terrorist.
terrorist networks seeking access to nuclear source.
Okay, good. So trouble with that word terrorist. Right. So one more time. Safa, terrorist.
Terrorist,
And then here we had undermine.
undermine.
Okay, so we got a few words here. Undermine conventional deterrence. What does, well, let's start with deterrence. What does that mean? What does it mean to deter someone from doing something?
Discouraging.
Yes.
Prevent.
Yep. So this is why most people buy a dog. They want to deter anyone from breaking into their house. And what is a rogue state? Rogue is sort of really,
It's like breaking law to
breaking the law, kind of, yeah. A rogue is kind of an old-fashioned word for a criminal, someone who doesn't obey the rules. So a rogue state would be a state that is not interested in the international order, that it kind of wants to do its own thing and create chaos. North Korea is a prime example of a rogue state. It just doesn't care what anyone thinks. Diplomacy with them is almost impossible.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that means. And then we have, what does undermine mean?
Underground. Under something.
Imagine like digging under someone to cause them to collapse. That's what undermining means. So, if a classic example is if the kid goes to one parent and says, "Can I watch TV?" and the parent says no, and then the kid goes to the other parent, says, "Can I watch TV?" and that parent says yes. So the second parent has undermined the authority of the first parent.
I still didn't got the meaning.
Someone control or give you permission to do something prohibited before?
So
it's kind of power?
yeah. So mom says no. Dad says yes.
Now the
Yes,
dad
the
is
power of mom.
undermined the mom.
Okay.
So what's a synonym for undermine here?
That dad doesn't have any authority on top of his mother.
Or the dad, he took over the power from weekends.
The
Okay.
opposite, sorry, yes.
Like less effective.
Yeah, to make something less effective or to weaken. So you know mining, right? Digging in the dirt for
Yes.
minerals.
Yes.
So undermine, imagine like someone's house being here and then you're digging underneath their house, then their house is just going to fall down.
Okay, so okay. Yeah.
So
So the base is weak. So the house gonna fall.
yeah, so it means to weaken someone else's power or authority. Everything that we're seeing in the United States and even with Canada with police violence. So when people film this violence, when it comes out on TV, the way the police really behave, that undermines their authority because people stop trusting them. People stop respecting them when they see how they really behave. It undermines the authority of the police. All right. Hi, Dina. How are you doing? Okay, the issues from the last writing assignment, we're going to cover those on Tuesday because most people that are here now didn't attend Tuesday's class or do that writing, so we'll talk about that feedback on Tuesday. Okay, so what's the major argument from the no side? What can we add to this?
Okay.
So that's a good argument. Countries use nuclear weapons to threaten other countries, for sure. And what's the other idea that was put in here?
Yeah. It could be part of another one, like terrorist organization.
Yeah. So nuclear weapons can fall into the hands of terrorist organizations. Especially when states fall. Like when the USSR collapsed, there was a lack of centralized authority in the former USSR. And what that meant was that a lot of generals were in control of a lot of military equipment, but those generals themselves were not under control of the Soviet government. So they sold off a lot of the Russian weaponry without any kind of authorization. It's just crazy what they were selling. There was no oversight. Nobody was monitoring what they were doing. They could just sell stuff and it would go unnoticed for decades.
Wow.
Right. And that's with a big country like Russia. Right, that supposedly everything was centralized at some point, but that can happen too. Anyway, nuclear weapons can fall into the hands of terrorist organizations. If you're talking about rogue states, for example. Right, like North Korea can sell nuclear material to someone who's actually going to use it. Because North Korea possibly doesn't want to get nuked by the United States, but they'd love to sell some nuclear material to a terrorist who'll go set off a nuclear bomb somewhere in the United States, right? Because then they can't be tracked back to North Korea.
Yeah.
Okay, so pretty straightforward. So this is the first part that we have to talk about. And keep in mind, you've got two body paragraphs. So if you're arguing that no, then this is going to be developed into one body paragraph. Or if you're yes, then this has to be developed into one body paragraph. So this, I would say, you should talk about MAD. What does MAD refer to?
A mutual assured destruction.
That's right. And then obviously you would need to explain how that works.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. So it's one example of each?
Well, you're not going to talk about both sides. You're only going to talk about one side. So getting back to the question, the threat of nuclear weapons helps to maintain world peace, and nuclear power provides clean and cheap energy.
Okay.
So this is the second thing we have to talk about.
Yes, so what I mean is in each question, we have yes and no.
This is just for brainstorming.
Okay.
On the actual exam, if you get this type of question that says, to what extent do you agree? You do not argue both sides.
Okay.
If it says, discuss the advantages and disadvantages, or if it tells you to talk about both sides, then you have to. But if it just says, do you agree or disagree, or to what extent do you agree, you are only obligated to talk about one side, and that's what you should do.
Okay.
Okay, so does anyone have any arguments for nuclear power provides clean and cheap energy? Yes or no? Let's start with Dina this time.
Yes. 1 second. Question.
Do you agree that nuclear power provides clean and cheap energy?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, why do you say that?
First, because there is no emission of CO2 or other gases, because there is no burning fossil fuels.
Fuels. Good. Okay. Anything else you can say about that?
So as a result, it will be environmentally friendly type of energy.
Is it cheap? It says clean and cheap. And most people never mention the cheap aspect.
Yes, clean, this one cheap. I'm not sure, I thought it's expensive, but as this one they said cheap. It's expensive.
So let's say you say it is expensive, but how can you rationalize that?
Maybe because it's a sophisticated type of energy, so maybe you need to have a professional, I mean the machines or the professionals who operate it, so they need to be highly qualified, so it is, or the plant, what they call it, the plant that produce this type of energy, it's expensive.
Yeah. So you can't say it's cheap, but you can rationalize the high cost by saying you get
It's
clean
worth paying.
energy. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
worth paying, huh?
Yeah, because you're not getting pollution, right?
Yes. So if you need to pay money to clean the environment because of, I mean, it's expensive, but it's worth paying because at first it will give environment clean, which important for people's life, as well as you might, yeah, I would say that. I mean, even it's expensive, but it's worth paying that. We can say no residual effect on people's life.
You would have to explain what that means.
No healthcare, yeah, associated with pollution, yeah.
Okay.
Can we say, it's a suggestion here, can we say that it's inexpensive to build but relatively cheap to run?
Are they cheap to run? That is another good question. I have no idea. What I do know is that they're very, very expensive to shut down.
Okay.
And
So
that's
in
something
this,
we don't budget for. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
in this case, how we can agree on one side and the other side, like we say it's clean, but it's expensive. It's okay?
No, I would say it.
Or we explain, even though it's expensive, but overall it's cheap because there is no effect on the pollution on this one. The bigger picture, yeah. So we can say overall it is considered cheap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
After looking to the overall picture.
Exactly.
Okay, got your point.
Right. It's like if you spend more money on a technology that has lower costs associated with it down the road, then it's not really more expensive. Right? In many cases, what's cheap to buy is expensive to run, and what's expensive to buy is cheap to run. Right? When you add up like related costs of healthcare, for example, destruction of the environment. So just as an example, if you don't want to use nuclear power, what's one of the most common forms of energy production?
Sorry, of what?
Of energy production. How do many countries produce energy that is very highly polluting? Like, what's the dirtiest fuel for making? What's the dirtiest fuel for making electricity? Coal. Yeah, it's extremely cheap. It's very plentiful, but it's filthy, right? And it's actually more radioactive than nuclear energy. If you want to look it up, it's quite fascinating, but burning coal creates radiation, much more so than actual nuclear energy. Right? So it's a carcinogen, not just in terms of like it messes up your lungs, but it also irradiates everything. Okay. Does anyone disagree that nuclear power produces clean and cheap energy?
I'm not disagree. I agree.
Yeah. Just to play devil's advocate, if you wanted to disagree, what would you say? Devil's advocate means arguing the other side just to see what happens. And that's also a polite way to disagree with someone at a meeting. So you don't disagree with them directly, but if someone says something that you don't think is correct, you can start your remarks by saying, just to play devil's advocate. And then you discuss or describe a situation where that person's suggestion might not work. So in this case, just to play devil's advocate, why might some people say that nuclear power does not produce clean and cheap energy?
Some types of this energy produce radiation.
Yes.
Expensive, we can't say it's expensive, we know that, but clean, radioactive substance they use, and they are carcinogenic.
Security threat.
I think if this station will explode, something will happen. And their effect is widespread. I mean, it's not limited to one. So it may kill hundreds of people.
Right, and what were the two big nuclear incidents in the world's history?
Chernobyl.
And what was the other one in Japan?
Hiroshima?
Fukuoka?
Fukushima.
Fukushima? Okay.
Yeah.
And obviously, if someone makes a nuclear bomb out of nuclear waste that they steal, then that's an incredibly expensive security threat. Okay. So why don't we do a bit of writing together? So you're not going to mix and match these. You're not going to say no for one side and yes for the other. You got to pick two no's or two yeses. Otherwise, I don't want to say don't ever do this. You could pick no on one side and yes on the other, but it means you have to introduce a lot of other language to clarify that you have this dual position. It's much easier and much clearer to pick two no's or two yeses, just to be consistent. You're gonna end up with a much stronger essay. So if you want to try and do both, go for it, but I don't recommend it. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we're going to write a thesis statement. And just before we do that, let's talk about the structure of what this kind of essay is going to look like. So this is agree, disagree. So in an agree, disagree essay, we have the same introductory structure. We start with what's the first thing that goes in here? Kelly.
The context.
The context, right? And for your context, just paraphrase the first part of the prompt. And then what's the second part of the introduction?
Just could be the thesis.
Thesis, always.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to have 2 body paragraphs. And the tree structure is topic, reason, evidence,
If you can.
example. And in our conclusion, we're also going to start with the thesis. And you might put a final thought in there, but not necessarily. Or a prediction. Okay, so in the chat box, we'll start with our intro paragraph. So you're just going to paraphrase the first part of the prompt. But state this as this is a belief, right? Because you're arguing with this point, whether you agree or disagree. So present this as a belief. Okay, I'm just going to share this with you. Okay, so I just put that in the chat. Okay, Dina, are you there?
Yes.
Okay. So your statement doesn't discuss the peaceful living part. Right. This is about the energy part of it.
So in this way, we need 3 reasons.
No, you need.
I agree because.
Yeah, why do nuclear weapons help to maintain the peace? And then the other part of it is the energy part. Here, I'm going to put the question back here. Your intro focuses on the nuclear power part, not the helps to maintain world peace part.
Yes, I thought that one, the first one is like general statement. But you are right, yeah, it's also advantage.
So let's put something in here. There are other ways to do this too. This isn't the only way to do it. What are you stuck on?
For me, I stuck with the thesis. Shall I need to repeat because the part of the question does the advantage? Whatever they said, therefore the advantages outweigh the disadvantage. So shall I put this part of the paraphrase the question and then I will mention it again in the thesis, or I can go direct to the thesis?
I would do it a little bit differently. You could start off with this kind of prompt. Is the subject of intense debate? Because it is. However, what about using this format? Let's fill in the blanks for this kind of format. What is the subject of intense debate?
The threat of nuclear weapons?
Mm-hmm. Let's simplify. Okay, whether nuclear weapons and nuclear energy contribute to making the world a safer and cleaner place. Subject of intense debate. Okay. However, despite Okay, I agree that nuclear weapons make the world more peaceful because, what is your reason?
This is environmental friendly, right?
Well, the first part is I agree that nuclear weapons make the world more peaceful because don't overthink this. We're just summarizing the ideas we talked about earlier.
Mm.
This stuff.
Yeah.
This is very, very briefly. How would you capture those ideas? What's MAD in a nutshell?
Say signatures with destruction. Because we can agree both countries not to fight. Both have nuclear weapons, so we're gonna lose no matter what.
Right. So I'm going to summarize this as because they make war far too dangerous. And that nuclear energy is beneficial because
It's environment.
Yeah, and what's the main reason that makes it environmentally friendly?
Because it doesn't produce any gases. So it doesn't contaminate.
I'll just call it emissions. We can make it even simpler.
Emissions. Okay.
Okay, let's see how this reads. Whether nuclear weapons and nuclear energy contribute to making the world a safer and cleaner place is the subject of intense debate.
Usually when we use whether, we say whether or not.
Yeah, you can put whether or not. In many cases, it's understood from the context, so you don't need to put or not, but you can if you want to. It's debate. However, despite some dangers and costs associated with this technology, I agree that nuclear weapons make the world more peaceful because they make war far too dangerous, and that nuclear energy is beneficial because it doesn't produce emissions.
What about cheap?
It doesn't produce emissions. And I put that nuclear energy is beneficial. So I'm not putting clean and cheap, I'm just putting beneficial because it doesn't produce emissions, and then I'll explain that in greater detail in the body paragraph. Because what our explanation for the cheap part of it requires a bit of explanation, right?
That's why for me, I felt this part is difficult. And
yeah, but it is difficult, but I'm not going to try and stick that in my thesis. It's too complicated for a thesis, so I'm just going to summarize them as is beneficial, and then I'll give the detailed explanation later. Remember, most of your marks are not in the introduction. The introduction is it's a structural feature of an essay to introduce the topic and summarize the main things that you're going to talk about. but you don't get any marks for your topic development in the intro. That's expected in the body paragraphs.
Can we use however and despite together? Like,
oh yeah, absolutely.
okay. So why? We can start with despite something, I agree. No need for however, I feel.
Mm-hmm. We could put, in my opinion, despite some dangers and costs associated with this technology, nuclear weapons make the world more peaceful. Why don't we do it that way?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't need, I agree, because we have, in my opinion. Okay, let's go with that one then. So now we need a couple body paragraphs. Seems we lost Abby. I don't know what happened to her, but let's work on a couple body paragraphs. So we've got the context, we've got the thesis. Now we're going to move on. Okay, what is our first body paragraph going to be about?
Nuclear weapons, yeah.
So if this is our thesis, then your topic sentence, together with the reason, is going to be a paraphrase of this part of the thesis, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we put that in our own words? Kelly, go ahead.
You mean the nuclear weapons make the world more peaceful?
Mm-hmm.
They work 5 to 10 years. Okay.
So we want to take this idea and put it in our own words. Put it in, paraphrase it again for the topic sentence. Remember, your full thesis statement at the beginning, you cut that in half,
Yeah.
and that's your two topic sentence for the body paragraphs. And then you paraphrase it, and then that's your thesis and the conclusion, right? So you are saying the same thing 3 times. And that's the way an essay is supposed to be structured. Say what you're going to say it, and then say what you said.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Nuclear weapons make the world more peaceful because to me.
What's a way to paraphrase "make the world more peaceful"?
Peace. Nuclear weapons contribute
to peace.
To peace. To peace.
Why?
Because we can't we can arrange decisions with other countries. Like we can contribute to peace by decide if we want to continue the war or not, for example.
think about it in like, you know, in the United States, people have the right to purchase weapons. Right? Why do people buy guns?
For security.
Right. You attack me, I kill you.
Yeah.
Right. So that's how guns work. But nuclear weapons are a bit different, right? So this is what the challenge here is to explain how they work
Yeah.
in your own words. But basically, you attack me, I attack you, we both die. It's not like a gun. Like if I shoot you first, then you're dead and I'm alive and I win. But it doesn't work that way with nuclear weapons, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the challenge is to describe that in your own words.
I would probably say nuclear weapons contribute to peace by using it as an advantage of defense and not to attack.
That's true, but the grammar doesn't really work.
Yeah.
I'm going to put that as by making war unwinnable. And that needs a bit of an explanation. Can you explain how MAD, mutually assured destruction, works?
So basically, between countries, for example, by having a mutual decision, like not destroying to each other, we can stop using the nuclear weapons. So that could be an evidence, but talking about a little bit more short terms, that's my question, that's my problem.
Okay.
How describe exactly what I said?
That's always the challenge of writing. How to describe your ideas clearly and in a grammatically correct way. Safa, do you want to give this a try?
Okay, I can try. Actually, my problem with this prompt, I couldn't decide if I agree or no.
What's easier to talk about? That's what you should do. Remember, you're not writing what you believe in your heart. You're just writing what is easier for you to communicate. This is a language test. It's not a content test.
Okay, now we are talking about the nuclear pen or the nuclear thing, like agree with the nuclear weapon.
Yes.
Contribute to peace.
Yeah, and we've got all this great vocabulary here.
Evidence. It's a research or research conducted by
What could be an example that supports this notion? Have any
like example if two strong countries nuclear weapon, they try to minimize war or interaction with the conflicts with the strong country also have the same power.
Mm-hmm.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello?
It's a little
Can you
bit
hear me?
unclear. It's a little bit unclear.
Okay. If two countries with a nuclear weapon, usually they try to decrease conflict,
Mm-hmm.
or they try didn't make conflict with any power country have the same nuclear weapon. Has the same nuclear weapon.
So what happens if two countries with nuclear weapons go to war?
No chance to anyone to win. Just for sure, both countries, they will have destruction.
Destroyed.
Okay.
If two countries with nuclear weapons go to war, there's no chance for either side to win. Both sides will be destroyed. Okay. This is known as mutually assured destruction. Okay, what do we have here? Okay. Okay. So what do we know is true? Right. Have there been any conflicts with nuclear powers or between nuclear powers since the development of nuclear weapons?
If I remember very well, not long ago, the president of the United States went to North Korea because the dictator of North Korea, he was threatening the United States. And he was saying to Donald Trump that if you don't do such a thing, we will send you a nuclear weapon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was one of the examples. I don't remember exactly what was it because I don't remember very well, but that was a good example of threatening. He was actually threatening the United States.
Mm-hmm. And then what happened as a result?
They have, we both talk and they have the decision to no winning, just keep it like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they have so they become in a conclusion that they shouldn't destroy each other.
Mm-hmm.
And the dictator from North Korea, he just back off.
Okay, so yeah, you could write that as your example. There's an even more simple one. So we talked about all the countries that have nuclear weapons. Have these countries attacked each other since that time?
Mr. Yan, if we argue on the other side, like if we disagree, maybe it will be easier. That is dangerous, it's expensive. But the problem, are we judge if it is clean?
We can do that one too.
Yeah.
We can do both. You should be able to argue for both sides. Right? It shouldn't matter which side you pick. At this point, you should be able to develop arguments for either side. Right? Because remember, this is a language test, not a content test. So it actually shouldn't matter which side you pick. So you just pick the one that's easier for you to write about. but you should be able to write this topic from both sides. So we can do the opposite point of view in just a few minutes. We can kind of do this one first in point form. And then we'll write an essay for the other side as well. Okay, so this one, if I were to give an example, I'd say, for example, since the development of nuclear weapons, there haven't been any wars between nuclear armed countries. Okay. Despite many political conflicts between them.
Thank you.
Does
makes sense.
that, okay.
Yeah.
Then you could even, if you want to use an extreme example, you could talk about North Korea and how this little country, just because it has nuclear weapons, has been essentially left alone, despite the fact that it's kind of an international troublemaker.
Yeah.
But it's also restricted in terms of how much trouble it can cause, because North Korea would love to attack South Korea, but South Korea has a close alliance with the United States, which does have nuclear weapons. So they know it's going to happen, right? Again, even though he's crazy, the guy is not going to dare to use his nuclear weapons. It's what we call posturing. Do you know what that means?
No.
Do you know posture?
Yeah.
Your parents always tell you, don't slouch in your chair. It's bad for your posture. So posturing just means pretending. Pretending to be like an angry country that's ready to use nuclear weapons. He's not sincere in his threats. It's a bluff. That's what posturing means.
Okay.
Do you know what a bluff is?
Yes, fake.
Yeah, like a fake. Okay. Okay, this is quite simplistic. It's kind of underdeveloped, but I'm just going to leave it as is. Also too short. It's only it's less than 80 words. But this is the core idea. Now, what about for the environment? Okay, that's the second point we have to talk about.
So nuclear energy could be beneficial or least beneficial.
Also
beneficial for the environment.
Because
emission free. Because it doesn't produce any emission.
So we have to talk about the low cost too. So how are we going to phrase our, how do we summarize this big idea that we have about, in terms of the bigger picture, it saves money because you don't have all of these pollution related costs.
So it's not really low cost. It's cost to build, but it's low to run.
Okay, so let's say it saves beneficial. Let's go like this. Because it doesn't produce emission and it saves money.
In the long run?
Yes. In the long run. In terms of okay, let's leave it like this. We won't make it too complicated. We can expand after. Okay. Why are we saying this?
So just I have a question. Body paragraph number 2, we have to talk about disadvantages, right? Or I will include just my opinion, like all advantages, and then mention my opinion.
No. This is an agree-disagree. So your opinion is stated very clearly in the thesis, and then your 2 body paragraphs support that position.
Okay.
So
I will not mention any disadvantages. All should be advantage if I agree.
Right.
Okay.
You don't need to argue against yourself in this type of prompt.
Yeah, I got it wrong. Thank you.
So if we said, so yeah, our first body paragraph is the benefits of nuclear weapons. They contribute to peace. And our second body paragraph is about the benefits of nuclear technology, nuclear energy, because it's good for the environment and it's cheap. Okay, so we've got 2 arguments here. So here, first of all, nuclear power, nuclear energy doesn't do what? Say it's clean since what?
Since no emission.
No harmful gases are emitted into the environment. Second, nuclear power is cheap over the long term, in the long run, over the long term, despite very high costs of building a nuclear reactor. Society avoids what?
About paying for treating people.
Let's say victims
of pollution.
Yeah. What are other consequences of pollution, like economic consequences?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's keep it simple at that. As well, nuclear energy contributes to a higher standard of living thanks to the resulting clean air.
Also, nuclear energy, I think is a good advantage. It gives electricity to large cities.
Mm-hmm. Well, so would coal and gas and hydro. So
Mm-hmm.
electricity produced in any way is going to power our large cities. So
Mm-hmm.
is there another point that you're hinting at, or what do you mean?
No, I meant that one, that point exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's not different in that respect compared to other forms of energy, then I wouldn't talk about it.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Let's say uh, environment. Astronomical in the long term. I mean, if you want to be a little bit poetic, you could say something like there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? Or pay now or pay later. You either pay high cost up front or you pay high cost down the road. You either pay a high cost up front or you pay a high cost down the road. There's no free lunch.
What do you mean when you said human health are astronomical in the long term? What it means the word astronomical?
Extremely big.
Extremely big. What another word could you use as a, yes, as a synonymous of enormous?
Yep. Huge.
Huge. Okay.
Astronomical is a good word.
Yeah, I like it. I never used it before, but I like it.
Yeah. You know, astronomy is the study of stars and planets, right?
Yeah, huge, big space.
So if you're talking about things like the U.S. debt, for example, the U.S. debt is astronomical. Household debts are astronomical.
Okay.
Just when you're talking about huge numbers.
Mm-hmm. I like the word.
Sounds a lot better than huge. You either pay a high cost up front.
Huge.
Yep. Okay, so again, we want a significant statement based on these reasons. Nuclear power is, we want to look at our prompt again just to make sure this matches up.
It's an advantage.
Nuclear power provides clean and cheap energy. Based on these is.
Could you put the based on this reason nuclear power is clean and inexpensive? Okay.
And I'm just going to add this, considering the alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then in the conclusion, you would restate your thesis, and you can put an observation or a prediction in at the end too.
And in thesis, we repeat the same as above, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Because this is a summary paragraph. You don't want to make it too short. I would perhaps even make it 2 sentences. In this case, where your thesis is 2 sentences, don't bother with a final thought. There's no, in the IELTS rubric, there's no marks for this.
Okay.
Right. So if you're coming up short, you might want to put that in, but again, most of your development needs to be in the body paragraphs. That's where the examiner is looking for your ideas.
Okay.
Just as a very quick exercise, how would you, this is our thesis from the beginning, how would you put this in your own words? So we don't need this part, just the my opinion part. Thesis statements often begin with therefore.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, what's the first part?
Nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, nuclear weapons will be safe.
Keep going.
Will be safe for our community or our world.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have to say why?
Yes.
Make the word safer by keeping the threats away from war, by making war more dangerous.
Or we could say more deadly.
Yeah.
So synonym.
Mm-hmm.
More deadly as well.
Mm. Okay, pardon. Provides beneficial, provide relative, inexpensive.
Okay, functionally, this is all you need to put. Let's see how we are on the word count and what we would need to do for development purposes. So let's go like this. So we are at, this is long enough.
Okay.
This paragraph is more developed. This one's at 145 words. This one is at 82, and that includes these things too. So it's more like 75. This paragraph needs about 50 more words. So maybe two additional sentences. Because if you don't do that, you're going to have one body paragraph that looks like this, and then your second one that looks much bigger, and it's uneven development. Okay, what could we add to this one? Let's have a look at some of this good vocabulary here. Retaliation, escalation. Okay, we haven't used those words.
I like the way escalation. So we can add on a nuclear weapon. This is not mutilation, destruction. Also destroy. Of death. What is fledge mean?
You ever heard the word fledgling?
No.
Fledgling is a baby baby bird.
Baby bird.
Yeah.
So what is the meaning here?
Fully fledged means like fully existing, fully ready, happening on a large scale.
Simple word?
So technically, fledgling is the stage in an animal's life between hatching or birth and becoming capable of flight.
Mm-hmm.
So after the bird is born, but before it can fly, it's called a fledgling. So they sometimes fall out of a nest and then you have to pick them up and get them back in their nest, right?
So before this starts scaling to a conflict. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so imagine bird hatches,
Mm-hmm.
but before it can fly away, it's called a fledgling. So the same way, a conflict hatches,
Mm-hmm.
and before it can kind of turn into like a full conflict,
Mm-hmm.
that would be a fully fledged conflict. People talk about like fully fledged problems. So the problem first appears,
Yeah.
and then people don't do anything about it. Like for example, a leak. It's a small problem at first, it's a small crack, you ignore it, and then it's a fully fledged problem when that crack gets bigger and you've got flooding.
Okay. So we can have a fight, a fledged fight, before we escalate into an astronomical problem.
Yeah, it's like the border disputes between India and China, right? It's a small conflict. It's at the diplomatic stage. Occasionally, somebody fires a gun, but nothing big happens.
Okay.
But if one side actually sent tanks into the other side's territory, it would quickly turn into a fully fledged war.
Okay. Write down that.
Let's try this. Got this word retaliation.
The word retaliation is like returning.
Sorry?
The word retaliation, it means returning?
It means revenge.
Revenge?
You
Okay.
do something bad to me, I will retaliate and do something bad to you.
Okay. Revenge.
Okay, now it's getting closer in size to the first one, to the second body paragraph. All right, let's write this from the opposite point of view. Okay, how shall we begin? Dina. Dina? She might have stepped away. Okay, so it's just the opposite, right?
Yeah.
Start with nuclear weapon contribute to threaten other countries.
Sure. I would start off with something a little bit more general. I'd say nuclear weapons contribute to making the world more dangerous.
Yeah.
Because
Because it's contribute to threaten other countries.
with impunity.
Impunity.
Yeah, impunity is, I don't know if you want to use this word, but it's a really big word, and the root is punish.
Oh yeah.
So with impunity means with no threat of punishment. For example, if you're a diplomat, you know, sometimes you see cars with red license plates. Those are diplomatic plates, right? Which means that person is the official representative of another country. So the police cannot even arrest such people.
Okay.
Right? So diplomats are notorious. They have a bad reputation for completely ignoring traffic rules, for ignoring parking regulations, because they don't have to, there's no way you can make them pay parking tickets, for example. Okay, so they park anywhere they want with impunity.
Like make sure never get punishment or penalties.
Yeah. So for example, so the example could be Korea. You could use the example of the United States or Russia or China threatening weaker powers that don't have nuclear weapons. Right, like it makes people more brave in a sense, having these weapons.
Yeah.
Okay, so you could talk about North Korea here.
Could put that like even with that with first sentences, especially if this nuclear weapon beyond or possession. Like the people are not 100% like I don't know what I have to say. Like people not trusted or not like thinking.
Irrational.
Yeah, irrational. Exactly.
Okay. So we had this phrase can be considered a rogue state that doesn't care about
Safety of the world or world people.
Yeah.
Peace.
Doesn't care about peace. It behaves belligerently
But that's a
toward.
beautiful word.
And what does it mean?
Belligerent, like it's like kind of threatening.
Yes, exactly. In a threatening way, aggressively. Bella can mean war. Okay, the root of this word is war, bella.
Okay.
You have other words like bellicose, antebellum.
Mm-hmm.
Towards
Nice.
neighbors.
There.
Irrational or no need to put it.
Sure. It's this country is headed by an irrational ruler.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we say about that?
Mm.
The wheels.
Uncontrolled.
Okay. You could say the same thing about the United States.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If you want to talk about crazy people, you could also talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis.
I was waiting for you to mention that.
See, that example can lead to confusion because you can use that example in a few different ways. You have to be careful about what conclusion you draw from that particular incident.
About what?
Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh, okay.
When the Russian government was planning to put nuclear weapons on Cuba, just a few miles away from Florida.
Mm.
So it showed what? It showed that the Russians were crazy in thinking that that was a good idea, that the world almost got destroyed because they pulled that stunt. And then there were US generals who were urging Kennedy to nuke the Russians. They believed that they could beat Russia in a first strike. Right, so they're completely crazy people on both sides. Remember, you don't want war. Many of you have kids. You don't want war because you don't want to see your kids become soldiers and get sent off to the other side of the world to go die in some crazy conflict. I don't want war. I've got 2 sons. But there are lots of people who love war. Okay, so a lot of people don't think or feel the way we do. Okay, so that's something that you could write about here. From the environmental side, okay, here, oh, we can talk about this too. As another example, nuclear weapons can fall into the hands of terrorists who are not accountable either to a country's citizens and who don't belong to the United Nations or maintain diplomatic ties with other countries.
So in one word, they don't even know how to use the nuclear weapons
Well,
in the right way.
hopefully, but I think they would figure that out.
Yeah.
Cornerstone of nuclear deterrence. Okay, so they're thus not afraid of retaliation, which is the cornerstone of nuclear deterrence. Cornerstone means like the most important aspect.
Okay, cornerstone.
Okay. And how about the environmental aspect? Okay, Safa?
Yeah. The nuclear weapon.
Now we're talking about nuclear energy.
Nuclear energy. It's caused damage or has a lot of disadvantage to environment, or had a lot of harmful. Is it dangerous?
Okay. Dangerous for people and And it is, see, astronomically expensive. We can use that word here. Okay.
Because my favorite word from now on.
Okay, what's our evidence?
I think at this point, when, as we mentioned before, it's the nuclear plant when it goes to failure, so there will be radiation of atoms or whatever to the environment, and is dangerous to people. And also, if want to talk about the waste product of this, I read it somewhere. Waste products of this energy is dangerous too. Amounts of radiation, yeah.
Okay.
In this case, if we don't have, like, we cannot recall any real examples, shall we mention that there is risk of, risk of cancer, some type of cancers in some areas, maybe, when there is this
Yeah, you can.
plants?
You can, but just try and remember these. Anything to do with nuclear, there's a few names, there's a few things you have to remember. Chernobyl, Fukushima, MAD, M-A-D. These are all the main concepts. There aren't that many. Right? The dangers of nuclear power. Okay.
I mean, these examples has happened like because of failure. This Fukushima
and technological failure and also failure of safety procedures.
Okay.
Plants are among the most complex technologies ever devised. Devised is like invented. And are prone to failure due to prone to failure when workers don't follow
Protocols.
procedures and protocols, follow safety protocols. Protocols, or when, I mean, in Fukushima, that power plant got hit by a huge wave, right?
Yeah.
Or when an unexpected disaster happens. as in okay. I mean, we still haven't controlled these things, right? After so many years. Even after many years, both of these nuclear sites are still highly dangerous and radioactive. We still can't fix these problems after several decades. Okay. And the costs have been, and we've already used the word astronomical. Let's just move that word. Furthermore, it is enormously
Or extremely, yeah, enormously expensive. Has been.
billions have been spent, on cleanup efforts. Okay, this is good. This is, it says 282, but there's a whole bunch of extra words in here. So this is at least 250, plus we need an introduction and a conclusion. Okay, so your choice, which one you want to do. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Any concerns?
No.
All right, so this will be due Monday by noon, and then the revision by Tuesday at noon. If it's late, I can't guarantee that I can get to it at all. Okay, so it's really important that we follow the deadlines. Monday by noon for version 1, Tuesday by noon for version 2. If you have any questions about the topic, feel free to post your questions in the Q&A forum, and I'll get back to you pretty quickly. I'm on the lookout for those.
Just one question, John. So we have to do one that is pros and the other one that is con?
No. Just pick one side.
Just pick one side, okay. And we have to send it to you by Monday noon?
Yes, you have to post it in the forum. So don't send it to me. Just post it in the forum, and I'll put that up. And I'll put that up very shortly, and it'll have a direct link to where you do your writing.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, let's call it a day.
Okay.
Thank you.